Welcome to my no bullshit Switchaxe guide for Monster Hunter Wilds. The Switchaxe is the ultimate power fantasy. Why choose between a huge axe or a huge sword when you can have both? This weapon is for you if you love fast-paced adaptive gameplay, morphing mid-combo and countering attacks with ease. Oh, and there are explosions. Huge explosions for big cinema. The downside? You have to constantly manage your switch gauge and learn basically two weapons at once. But once you mastered it, you will feel like a god. Now, let's dive straight in. The Switchaxe is a morphing weapon with two modes, sword and axe. Our playstyle revolves around using axe attacks to fill up your switch gauge and then morphing into sword mode to deal huge damage with big file bursts. Before we check out our basic moves, let's talk about the weapon-specific mechanic of the Switchaxe, the switch gauge. You can find it just below your sharpness indicator in the top left, and it's split into three parts. The main switch gauge, the power axe gauge at the bottom left, and the amped gauge at the bottom right. For now, let's focus on the main gauge. Each axe attack fills it up, and when it's above the marked line, you can morph into sword mode. Sword attacks, on the other hand, will deplete it. You can morph between these two modes by pressing R2. This also works while moving or mid-combo to instantly attack while morphing. If you try to morph into sword mode when you don't have enough gauge, your character will perform an awkward manual reload which locks you in place. We really don't want to do that. By default, you will draw into X mode when your weapon is sheathed, but you can draw directly into sword mode by pressing R2. Now, let's take a look at our X mode attacks. When you press triangle or Y, you will perform a simple 3-hit combo, which is repeatable. The second part of the combo fills the gauge up by quite a bit. When you hold your directional input, your first hit will be a forward slash, which covers some distance and then chains into the first combo. If you press circle or B, you will perform the wild swing combo. It costs stamina and is infinitely repeatable. After at least 2 swings, you can press triangle or Y to follow up with a heavy slam. This attack deals big damage and activates power axe mode. This is indicated by the bottom left part of the switch gauge glowing. All your axe attacks deal more damage and the switch gauge fills up faster while power axe is active. There are more ways to activate it and I will cover them a bit later. If you hold your directional input and press circle or B, you will perform a forward overhead slash or backwards fade slash if you need to reposition. This also works during all your other axe attacks. If you hold your directional input to the side and press X or A after your axe attacks, you can do a quick sidestep to dodge incoming attacks. Now let's take a look at the sword mode. Your sword attacks are faster and deal overall more damage than your axe, but your mobility and reach is worse. And like I mentioned before, all your sword attacks deplete your switch gauge. If it's empty, you will be forced back into axe mode. Your basic triangle Y sword combo hits 3 times for decent damage. Hitting a monster in sword mode will fill up your amp gauge at the bottom right of your switch gauge. Once it's filled up, you will regain a part of your switch gauge and your sword will be amped, dealing extra file damage with each hit. While amped, you also have access to a couple of new moves. More on files and extra moves later. When you press circle or B, you will perform a double slash into the Heavenward Flurry. A slower 2-hit combo that fills up your amp gauge really fast. After every sword attack, you can also press X or A with a directional input to do a quick sidestep to dodge or reposition. Almost all of your axe and sword attacks can be morphed into each other by pressing R2 mid-combo. This makes the gameplay really smooth and fluid. I will show a few of the most useful combos later. Alright, now that we covered the basics, let's go into more advanced stuff. Switchaxes have different Phial types. You can see the type by inspecting the weapon itself. All your discharge explosions and your sword hits while amped will do extra file damage depending on the Phial type your weapon has. There are power files which do physical damage, elemental files which do elemental damage, and status effect files which inflict status buildup like paralysis, poison or even KO and exhaust. Okay, now let's talk about the fun stuff, the discharge attacks in sword mode. Press triangle and circle or Y and B together to perform an element discharge. If you keep pressing triangle or Y after the first stab, you will continue discharging your sword for more fire damage, ending in a big explosion. You can also end it early by simply releasing triangle or Y. If your sword is amped, you can hold triangle and circle to perform the zero-sum discharge, one of the signature moves of the Switchaxe. You clutch onto the monster and smash triangle or Y to deal big damage, followed by a huge explosion. Like before, you can end it early by releasing triangle or Y. If you press R2 with triangle and circle or Y and B together, you will perform the unbridled slash. If your sword is amped, you can hold R2 after the initial input to charge up and perform your hardest hitting attack, the full release slash. You spin around, slash the monster twice and hit it with multiple file explosions. Cinema. But it gets even better. After an elemental discharge, you can press and hold R2 to combo directly into a full release slash for huge damage. This takes a long time to execute, but the damage is insane. All these attacks consume a big chunk of your switch gauge and morph you back into X mode. If you jump off a ledge, you can press triangle or Y for a basic jump attack in your current mode, or press R2 for a morph attack. You can also press triangle and circle or Y and B together after jumping to perform an elemental discharge. If you're amped, you will jump onto the monster and perform a zero-sum discharge. And while sliding, you can press triangle or Y for a jumping X attack, or R2 for a jumping morph attack. We also have not one, but two counters, one for each mode. While in X mode, press triangle and circle or Y and B together to perform an offset rising slash. If you time it with the monster's attack, you will counter, knocking it back and follow up with a strong attack. If you press triangle or Y, it will be an X attack, activating power X mode. But you can also press R2 during the animation to counter directly with a heavy hitting sword attack, morphing into sword mode. While you're in sword mode, press R2 and triangle or Y together for the counter rising slash. If you get hit during the animation, you will dodge the attack and counter attack with your sword. But keep in mind that you still take chip damage and it depletes your switch gauge. But if you time it just before you get hit, your switch gauge gets refunded and you take even less damage. Now let's take a look at the new mechanic in Monster Hunter Wilds, the focus mode. While holding L2, you can aim all your attacks, and if you press R1, you will perform the Focus Assault Morph combination. If you hit a wounded part of the monster, you will unleash a series of hits, destroying the wound. You will keep hitting the wound with the mode you started in, but you can press R2 during the hits to morph. Ending in X mode will activate Power X, while ending in Sword mode will perform a discharge finisher for big damage. Alright, we know how to attack and defend. Now, how do we apply that in a real hunt? Here are some tips. The Switchaxe has a very fluid gameplay thanks to seamless morph transitions by pressing R2 mid-combo. But keep your switch gauge in mind or you will end up manually reloading in dangerous situations. Our game plan is simple. Fill your switch gauge in X mode, get amped in sword mode, and send your big finishers when you see an opening. Here are some useful combos. At the start of the hunt, you can activate Power X mode by performing a sneak attack, then morph into sword mode and counter the initial scream of the monster. Keep pressing circle or B to fill up your amp gauge and continue fighting. You can loop your full release slash almost infinitely. After you use it, press triangle or Y for the X spiral burst slash, which refills your gauge. Press R2 to morph back to sword mode and send the full release slash again for a fun loop. If you can't sneak attack and need gauge and power X mode, you can press 2 times circle for 2 wild swings and then keep pressing triangle 3 times to get a lot of gauge back and activate power X mode. And remember, your circle or B attacks in sword mode will fill your amp gauge up the fastest. And lastly, thanks to our 2 counter attacks, we can and should stay aggressive all the time, so make sure to practice them. A counter attack into a full release slash is so satisfying. Got questions? Drop a comment or ask me live on twitch.tv/NinoMMO. If this video helped, hit that subscribe button and consider supporting me directly on Patreon. It really helps me keep making these no bullshit guides. Want to know the best Switchaxe armor skills? Check out this video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.